welcome to Miss Rose's Story Time. We're reading The Bronze Bow by Elizabeth George Spear, and we are on chapter 18 on page 129. Okay? Alright. I hope everyone's doing well, taking care of yourselves and others, and enjoying reading 30 minutes every day to get stronger, 20 minutes to stay the same, and less than 20 we'd get depleted in our level of strength. So let's begin on chapter 18, page 129. Late in the afternoon, on the last day of the month of Elul, Daniel, looking up from his work, saw a figure hurrying along the road, an unfamiliar figure muffled in a heavy turban and moving with a haste that warned him of trouble. He put down his hammer and waited. It was only when the stranger entered the shadow of the doorway and pushed back the turban that he saw it was Thesia. Who could have imagined that Thesia could look like this, stricken, gray-faced, the wet hair clinging to her forehead? "Oh, Daniel," she gasped, "they've taken Joel." "The soldiers?" "Yes. Oh, I knew from the beginning that this would happen. What can we do?" "I knew it too," he thought, with a wave of sickness. "Where is he?" "In the garrison. He didn't come home all night. This morning I went to the harbor and couldn't find him. I didn't know what to do. So I went to Kemuel, and he managed to find out. They have been suspecting the centurion's kitchen slaves. Yesterday, 5 slaves were flogged, and when Joel came to the door, they took him." "Did Kemuel find out any more?" "They're sending some prisoners east in the morning. They've sentenced Joel to go with them." "Does that mean the galleys?" "Daniel, Joel could not live in the galleys. Through his own horror, Daniel saw that the girl was close to collapse. Numbly, he reached out and touched her shoulder. "Rosh will have planned for this," he said. "He will know what to do." At his touch, she began to weep wildly, her hands covering her face. She was borne this all night, he thought, had all day. Has she eaten or rested? Through the open door to his house, he saw Leah, standing behind her loom, staring. How much had she understood? With one arm across her shoulder, he led Thesia to the door. "Take care of her," he said to his sister. "I'm going to the mountain." Leah came from behind the loom and held out her arms, and Thesia stumbled into them, the golden head bent gently over the dark one. In 2 hours' time, Daniel reached the cave. The thorn fire was blazing, and the fragrance of roasted mutton hung in the air. The men who sprawled on the ground barely glanced at him. At the mouth of the cave, Rosh sat, rubbing at a fine ivory-handled dagger. He listened, giving more attention to the blade than to Daniel's distraught message. "He was getting too confident," he grunted. "They can't know who he is," Daniel urged. "Joel would never let them know his father's name. They'll think he's only a fisherman. They won't be looking for an attack." "Attack?" Rosh repeated coldly. "What are you talking about?" If we move fast, we can surprise them on the road." "We?" "All of us will help you. You can count on us." "Speak for yourself," Rosh said. "It's not my affair." Anger exploded in the red blaze before Daniel's eyes. "Joel was following your orders," he shouted. "You're responsible for him." Rosh still rubbed at the steel. "On this mountain, every man is responsible for himself. That holds for Joel." Daniel held back his rage. Listen to me, Rosh. He struggled to speak reasonably. 8 of us took Samson from the Romans. Use your head. We took Samson from some screwy traders, Roman soldiers. That's another matter. Desperately, Daniel tried to different attack. Joel is important to us, he argued. Important? He was stupid enough to get caught. You think I can spare 8 men or 1 man for that? Daniel's control gave away. You just use him and let him go without even a try? Rosh squinted up at him. I've warned you before, he said in a voice ugly. There's a soft streak in you. Till you get rid of it, you're no good to the cause. The red mist of anger cleared suddenly from Daniel's mind. He looked at the men who had been his leader. He saw the coarsened face with its tangle of dirty beard. He saw the hard mouth, the calculating little eyes. He saw a man he had never really looked at before. The cause, he said with despair. How could you know what it means? Fury molted the man's face. Take care, you! Don't threaten me, Daniel said. I'm not one of your men, not any longer. Rosh coiled back. You fool! He spat out. How far can you get without me? Daniel looked steadily into the narrowed black eyes. In another moment, Rosh would spring at him. At the prospect, his hands clenched with savage pleasure, but his mind was in control now. He could not fight with Rosh. The very strength of his hands he owed to this man. And what good would it do Joel? He turned away without speaking and passed through the ring of silent, wary men. He knew that he was through with the mountain forever. And he went down the trail. Footsteps came pounding after him. Daniel, wait! It was Jockin. What are you going to do? I'm going to go get Joel. By yourself? No, there are 19 of us. 20, said Jockin. He had drawn himself up to his last skinny inch. Let me go with you, he pleaded. Before Daniel could refuse, Daniel decided quickly. Come then, he said. You can't be worse off. Even in his haste, he felt a sharp disappointment and regret. He had hoped that the footsteps were Samson's. He could have liked to say goodbye to the big man, to clasp the man's hand, to try to tell him not to watch any more, but this too he must put behind him. He and Jockin had the trail to themselves, but as he went down, the uncanny feeling grew on him that someone was behind. Had Rosh sent someone to follow him? Time and again he whirled about, but he could see nothing. His skin kept prickling. He quickened his stride till Jockin was running to keep pace. In the watchtower, 12 boys waited in the darkness, making no sound. One by one, others crawled through the field to join them. Kemuel had summoned every boy in the city. What is Rosh going to do? They greeted Daniel, their faces sober. They read the answer in his silence. Nothing? Nathan cried out, incredulous. After Joel his voice broke. The others stared at Daniel, too stunned and angry to speak. I have failed them all, he thought. They trusted me. What does it matter? Kemuel suddenly lashed out with scorn. We don't need your Rosh, your great leader. We'll do without him. Tumult exploded in the watchtower, anger flaring instantly into new hope. Wait, Daniel silenced them. Let's have one thing clear. Maybe some of you think, as Rosh does, that every man answers only for himself. We answer for each other. Nathan spoke swiftly. A dozen voices echoed with passion. Kemuel cut sharply across the clamor. Do we have a plan? Yes, said Daniel. At once every boy was quiet, for 19 against a Roman force. 20, said Daniel, his hand on Duncan's shoulder. If we use our heads, we can make 20 count for 100. We won't try to fight them. We will only get Joel. How? Confidence had come back into their voices. On the road. Daniel's mind was working clearly now. We can't break into the garrison. We can't afford to meet the Romans face to face. We can go south beyond Meldala and wait in the pass near Abril. On the cliff, we can spread out and throw down rocks so that they won't know how many we are. The Romans have no reason to expect an attack. When we have stirred up as much confusion as we can, then we'll take Joel. How? They questioned. He will be chained. That's a blacksmith's job. There was silence. One cannot do that alone, said Nathan. I'll go down with you. Before we go on, said Daniel, we must have a leader. Up till now, we have all been equal. We have already chosen, said another boy. You have always been the leader. Not by a vote. There's no need to vote, said Nathan. Does anyone here question who is our leader? Not a whisper challenged him. Then you will obey my orders, said Daniel sternly. He felt no pride or glory that he was their leader, as he had once dreamed, only a cold heaviness. The time has not come to fight the Romans, he told them. We have no right to waste lives that are needed for the cause, even for Joel. You are to stay on the cliff and distract the soldiers while I free Joel from the chains. Then you will all retreat as fast as you can. I don't think the Romans will follow. They'll be leery of a trap. This time they kept silent, not questioning his command. Take all the weapons you have, he ordered. We'll start now and find our place. He hesitated, feeling awkward but compelled to speak. Joel is the one who has always read us the scriptures. Now we'll have to remember the things he has read. Judas and Jonathan and Simon went out with a few against the enemy. We can do it too. The same God will strengthen us. In the darkness, each boy reached out and clasped the hand of the one nearest him. For God's victory, they said together solemnly. That's the end of 18. The end of 18. Now we're going to begin chapter 19 because we've only been reading for about 15 minutes. So here we go. Before dawn, the boys had found their position. In the darkness, they had followed the shore road south past Meldalia, striking inland to a place where the Via Maris, the road of the Romans, must follow to the coast. Wound between steep, almost unscalable banks, there they worked their way painfully upward and hid behind rocky projections to rest. With the first light, they ventured out, only one boy showing himself at a time, to collect the stones that would be their weapons. A very few carried spears and daggers. By the time the sun was fully risen, every boy was well fortified and concealed. Even during the night, there was traveling on this main road to the sea. During the early morning, they counted 5 large caravans with long files of burdened camels, families, tradesmen, sometimes small detachments of soldiers passed beneath their hiding place. This had long ago been a dangerous section of road, but now travelers passed with confidence because, more than 50 years before, the great King Herod had wiped out the robbers who dwelt in the caves of Abrila. And now a Roman wall flanked the heights, So long had it been since bandits had inhabited the place that now Daniel dared gamble that the Romans would have no suspicion of attack. On the steep cliff before where the boys were stationed, Daniel found the spot best suited to his own purpose. A fissure in the rock extended in an oblique line down the face of the rock, wide and deep enough in some parts to hide several men, ending on a narrow shelf barely 10 feet above the road. In the crevice that dipped below the level of the rocky shelf, he posted Nathan and Kemuel. "I'll free Joel and lift him up to you," he told them. "You reach down and pull him up. If any soldiers follow, use your spears. Only one can climb up at a time, and I think the second will think twice before he tries." "How do you get back?" Nathan asked, looking closely at Daniel. "When Joel is up, then give me a hand," Daniel answered. He had no real expectation that he would get back up the bank, but he meant to see, with the last ounce of his strength, that Joel did. Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it, seeing in Daniel's eye a reminder that they had chosen a leader. Through the noonday heat they waited, their energy draining away bit by bit under the merciless sun. As the hours went by, Daniel's foreboding deepened. This waiting was not the same as the times he had crouched behind a rock eager for Rosh's signal. It was no flimsy guarded caravan that awaited, and behind him was no tight-knit band that would move with precision and cunning, only a cluster of untried boys. Even now, as he glanced up, the flutter of a coat sleeve betrayed one of them. Still, he could count on them. He knew that every boy in the band was prepared to give his life. It was up to him, the one they had chosen leader, to see that none of them had to. But how different this was from the glorious battle they had hoped for. Would the day ever come when together they could pit their strength against the Romans for God's victory? Daniel put that thought aside. A more immediate worry was the uneasiness that had persisted all night, the feeling that he was followed and watched, even in the darkness. Could it be that in setting a trap for the Romans, he had led his band into some other trap? Almost he was tempted to call them back, but there was Joel. At mid-afternoon, Jachin brought the warning. He alone, of all the band, was trained to this kind of attack. He wriggled and dodged his way along the roadside and skinned up the cliff into the crevice. "Horsemen," he gasped. "About 8. Then foot soldiers. Then the prisoners." "Did you see Joel?" "No, too far away. But they've come a distance. The horses are lathered." Daniel gave 2 sharp whistles, the alert they had arranged, and looked up at the bank. "Climb up there, will you?" he growled to Jachin, pointing. "Tell whoever that is to pull in his rump before he gets a javelin in it. That would get Jachin also above the danger line, he reckoned. The first horseman swung into view, moving slowly to keep pace with the footmen. The cavalry rode in pairs, their spurs almost touching in the narrow pass, erect, silent, the plumes of their helmets rising and falling with the horses' pace. Would the others remember? The horsemen were to go through. Daniel tensed. He felt a vast relief as not a sound or motion betrayed the boys on the cliff. Behind the horsemen came the foot soldiers in a double line. He watched them pass, one steely face after another. He counted 16. Then shuffled the prisoners, chained together by the ankles in a long line. Joel was the 5th, barefoot, disheveled, his feet dragging. Between him and the rock marched a guard with a heavy whip. Behind the prisoners there would be more foot soldiers. Daniel held his breath. When Joel was nearly below him, he gave the signal. The first rock hurtled down the air and found a mark. The foot soldiers stumbled. Instantly the air was flecked with rocks. The order crackled back across the line. As one man, the Romans raised their shields above their heads. 4 men broke from the rank and charged up the almost vertical rock. A stone caught the first in the chest and sent him reeling back. A spear struck the second cleanly, but the line behind them resealed itself into an unbroken, purposeful unit. Daniel's heart sank. He had guessed wrong. The Romans were going to charge the bank, and the boys could not possibly hold them back for long. But in the same instant, at the shout for retreat, a thunder drowned out his voice. Jerking back his head, Daniel saw with horror a great rock that teetered on the opposite bank, ripped from the cliffside and crashed down, gathering speed and force, carrying with a roar of his dirt and stones. Stupefied, he watched the leaping, frenzied soldiers. There had been no one on that other bank. What had dislodged the rock? Then he glimpsed at a shape, huge, crouched like an animal, dodging on all fours along the bank. For one flash, he saw the powerful arms, the massive dark head. Samson! But how? Abruptly, he came to his senses. Now was his chance. With a thrust of his arms, he pulled himself up to the shelf of the rock and leaped. At his feet found the path. He sank his dagger below the shoulder of the guard, and as the man crumpled, dropped to his knees before Joel, pulled out his chisel and reached for the chain. The first blow of the sharpened tool left a nick in the iron. He struck again and saw the nick deepen. Confusion swelled around them. The prisoners were screaming now. He heard a second thudding roar, but he did not look up. As he raised his arms for the third blow, he felt himself seized from behind, and a paralyzing grip lifted clear off the ground, jerked upward like a helpless sack. For an instant he hung in the air, and then he struck against the rock. Pain whirled him in crazy circles, and through the pain he felt hands clutching and pulling, scraping his flesh along the rock. A heavy body struck squarely on top of him. Legs thrashed about his head, and blackness crashed down on him. He came out of the blackness into a blinding sun. There was rock under him, and pain zigzagged through his body. He blinked, trying to focus through the glare. Near him he made out a figure, Joel, sitting with his knees drawn up, his face buried in his arms. "Don't move," a voice warned. Kemuel's face blocked out the sky. "They've about cleared you out." Memory came back suddenly. He jerked up and sank back again, helpless again against the pain. He saw now that he was in the crevice of rock, but higher up the bank. "Careful," Kemuel warned. "You've got a broken shoulder bone, I think. Maybe a couple of broken ribs. Joel was luckier. He landed on top of you. He's got hardly a scratch." Daniel's hand groped for his head. He had an unfamiliar shape. "My irons hit you," Joel said, the voice sounding weak and dull. "Good thing," Kemuel spoke to Joel. "How could I have got him up here?" Daniel pulled himself up. "The soldiers? Gone, but there may be a guard. They didn't come up the bank." "No, I think the leader went down with the rock. They never got organized again." "The rock? Samson!" Daniel cried out, remembering. "I saw him up there." Joel and Kemuel looked at each other. Daniel tried to shake his mind clear. "How did we get up here? We were on the road." Neither boy spoke for a moment. "You didn't see?" Joel asked finally. "Not after they jumped on me." Not the soldiers, Joel said. It was Samson. I thought at first it was another slide coming down, and then he was there. He threw you onto the rock right over his head. Then he got hold of my chain and twisted it open with his bare hands, and he pulled me free and threw me up on top of you. Nathan and Kemuel pulled us down inside. It was Samson who had lifted me? And Samson who had been following all night? Not knowing what they were going to do, but knowing that they could not do it alone? And Samson, the stupid one, who had hidden on the other bank and routed the soldiers? Daniel stared sickly back at Joel. He made himself ask, "Where is he?" Joel's eyes met him squarely. They took him. He was wounded. A spear hit him even before he had the chain open. "He might be still." "No," said Kemuel. "They dragged him with them." He didn't even fight them. You don't need to worry about the galleys, Daniel. He won't live to reach the coast." Daniel turned his head away. Then he saw Nathan sprawled with his face against the rock. The blood gathered in the blackened pool beneath him. "He leaned too far out to pull you down," said Kemuel. "Nathan, whose bride of a few weeks waited in his new house." A sob suddenly twisted Joel. Why did you do it?" he choked. "I'd rather you should have let me." "How many others?" Daniel asked. "We couldn't see the others. Can you walk, do you think? We can climb back to where we plan to meet." "I can walk," said Daniel. Crawling, wiggling along the crevice, pulling themselves by fingers and toes, they finally reached the top of the cliff. Daniel lay panting, almost blinded again by the pain. When he was able to look about him, he saw that 5 gray-faced boys lay flat on the cliff's top. During the next endless hour, 12 more slowly wriggled their way to the meeting place. Finally, they were all together, all but Nathan. They lay in the hiding till sundown, not talking much. After the darkness fell, 4 of them went down to the crevice for Nathan's body. They could not hope to take him home with them, so they made a grave on the cliff and left him there. Then slowly, wearily, one at a time, they crept down to the road and made their way north like ordinary travelers. They shared a deep thankfulness that Joel was with them, but the might of Rome, seen close at hand, had shaken them. They knew that without Samson, they would have failed, and the eager confidence of the night before would never be regained. All right, so that was 18 and 20. So who, what, when, where, and why? We have lots of people. We have Daniel and Nathan and Joel and Kemuel and Samson. And what? Well, Joel got captured and they were going to rescue him. Why? Because the Romans were the enemies and the Romans had Joel because Joel was spying on them. When? Well, gosh, it all took place in like 2 days, night and then during the day, and then they waited and waited and waited. And where? I'm not really sure where. I know it was like the mountain place in the valley, and they went up to the mountain where Rosh was. Rosh didn't want to help at all. And then they went over and they gathered to the watchtower and things of that nature. How? Well, they weren't as equipped as the Romans, that was for sure. And Samson, they didn't know Samson was there. Thank goodness he was. So those are the things that I remember. You always can message me, like, share, and subscribe. Tell me your thoughts and how you're enjoying the story. And I hope you are reading 30 minutes every day. Please like, share, and subscribe. And peace be with you. Thank you.